Great. Good evening. Today is Monday, April 29th. This is a special meeting of the Guilford Board of Education. We are meeting tonight with the sole purpose of addressing the reductions to the proposed budget that were made by the Board of Finance at their most recent meeting. And these reductions are necessary following and the action that the Board of Finance took following the town referendum, which did not pass. The budget did not pass. At that Board of Finance meeting, the Board of Finance reduced the Board of Education budget by $835,000. And so tonight we will be determining where those dollars come from in our budget. I will note, and it was noted at the Board of Finance meeting, that both the town and the Board of Education, since our last meeting, have learned from our medical consultant that the medical benefit line can be reduced. That our obligations for the medical benefit line for the academic year 2024-25 is currently higher in our budget than it needs to be. And so I fully expect that that will be the first thing we discuss tonight. The remainder of the reductions we will discuss and then come to a vote at the end of tonight's meeting. I will note, and I'm going to repeat this at the end of the meeting, that there will then be a town meeting on May 14th, and there will be another referendum on May 21st. Again, the same polling places, same time. The last thing I want to note is we did, as a board, have the opportunity just last week, I'm losing my sense of time, to appoint someone to the vacancy on the Board of Ed left by our former colleague Noel Petra. We appointed Amy Fenellosen, are very excited to have her join us. She will be sworn in at our May 13th meeting, and at that point will be allowed to join us. So she is not here tonight because she has not yet been sworn in, but she has been appointed. Does anyone have any questions or comments before we dive in here? I think the only other thing I will note is that our colleague Moira Rader is joining us via Zoom. So I will be calling on her when she wants to speak. I will be certainly calling on her when it comes time to vote. The last thing I'll note is we are coming tonight, I think each of us with some ideas about where we might want to cut. I know Dr. Freeman has given this careful thought as well. It's certainly important to us to always hear his recommendations as a superintendent of schools. And so I am going to acknowledge again that we do have a sheet in front of us with some ideas. I think each of us also has a sheet with various cuts, and we'll walk through this in a way that allows everyone to give their suggestions. We will I'll keep a kind of a running log as we make kind of tentative decisions, and then at the end of the evening we will repeat and vote on an exact amount. So the first place I want to start again is this medical line. We have learned that again, that medical line now is approximately $500,000 over what it needs to be. And so I'm going to start off our discussion tonight suggesting that of the $835,000 we need to reduce tonight, that $500,000 comes from that medical line.
I think that's an easy place to start. I think it's also worth noting that we only find out these things after the fact, because we do our due diligence, our administration as well as the town administration, to go out to bid every year for these services. This is coming down a significant amount, but it could be going up as
It has in previous years.
And so, while this feels like an easy place to start, it's often a place in which we don't have a choice in coming years, that we could be faced with increased costs. So, I think, for those that say they're making this easy because they're taking from healthcare, well, we need to be on board with this when it happens and the cost goes up in a year, 2, 3, 5, whenever that is, because this is a shared expense with the board, with the town, as well as with the Board of Education.
I think it's also important to note that this is a savings that is based on the timing of the way we do our budgets and on the positive pressure that going out to bid that this year has applied. Mm-hmm. This is not a reduction in the health benefits that we are providing to our employees in the school district. So all district employees will continue to receive the same level of health benefits. We are just doing it at a recognized savings this year. This board recognizes that in 2 of the most recent budgets, cost savings drove the increases, and this year we are fortunate to have a reduction that we can book, and it may be, as you said, the only easy decision that we get to make this evening.
Right.
So I'm in favor of the $500,000 reduction with medical.
Any other thoughts or comments on that proposal? All right. We can start in 2 places. I can ask Dr. Friedman to run through some of his proposals, or I can start with any of my colleagues. Does anyone have a preference?
Leave the floor to Dr. Friedman.
Okay. I think because we all, I think I'm speaking for all of us, really do want to hear what our administration is suggesting, though we also have our own thoughts and ideas, and we'll have some proposals of our own. Would you mind, please, for sharing some of your thoughts, again, as superintendent on and as the person who helped draft the original budget, where you think you might like us to consider?
Oh, I'd be happy to. And so that leaves a chore for us for the rest of the evening to identify $335,000 of additional reductions. None of the ideas that are presented in this worksheet that I've handed out do we bring forward enthusiastically. These are all forced choices that we are making. These are all items that we had in 2 earlier versions of this budget. The one that we brought to the board as the administration, and all of these items that are here tonight survived all of your deliberation and remained in that budget even after you made reductions of over $250,000 to that initial budget. So again, these are all items that we believe are important, but we recognize that these are items, and we'll present them to you in 2 different ways tonight. Items that we are recommending as the place that we make these reductions reluctantly, and then a number of additional items that we know should be discussed tonight. And then ultimately, this is a decision that you, the board, will make, and we're happy to stay here and answer questions and help you think through those deliberations. So with all of that said, and noting that all of these are brought forward reluctantly, the first cluster of items do total $335,000, and it is where we would suggest beginning the conversation. And the first item on that list is an item that we have, in fact, bragged about to this board for the last 2 or 3 years. The Summer's Pathway program is a summer program that we have put into place in the school district. It is about providing extra academic touches for students during the summer months. And we have talked about how it is built on the idea of acceleration. It's built around exploratory and project style instruction. But the fact is, this program is one of the few items that we're going to be discussing tonight that is not mandated. It is a summer program. It is not a mandated part of FAPE. It is presented in the summertime, and to this point, it has been paid for by ESSER dollars. And at the last couple of Board of Finance meetings, there's been a lot of conversation that when ESSER funding sunsets, the benefits that were provided for those dollars should sunset with that. Now, we've worked really hard not to put ESSER dollars into positions which become recurring costs. Although we put some dollars in very limited ways into those positions, we've worked really hard over the last 3 years to move those positions into the budget. The Summer Pathways program would be moving wholesale from ESSER funding to operational funding. And again, it is a non-mandated component. The board does need to be aware this program is projected to service between 90 and 100 students this summer, and those students have started enrolling. And so if this is to be a reduction, the families who are planning on that filling part of their summer experience for their students need to know immediately. And again, we bring it forward reluctantly, but because of the funding source and because of the non-mandated position, it's why it stands on the list tonight. And it's a significant dollar amount. Well, we're working to create a list of $335,000. $90,000 is a big starting point for a program that's not required.
Can you talk about the cost and what goes into that $90,000? And has there been any consideration for a method of charging families for this?
It is primarily the cost of staffing. It is the cost of a teacher who has an administrative experience for taking the lead for the program, and then the teachers themselves, and they're being paid the summer equivalent, the summer identified rate within the teacher's contract. So I thought you were going to say about reducing staffing costs. No, we have not looked at a way of providing it as charging in the way that we charge for typical peers. That's not something that we've looked into at this time.
If there's only 100, I just quickly did the math.
You can't get there.
Do it. It's 900 a family.
It might be untenable.
Remind us again, how long is the program?
4 weeks, 4 days a week for 4 weeks.
Oh, I gotcha. So actually, that's not.
It's cheaper than that.
Fourth year.
I believe it's the third year.
Right.
So the feedback we've had is that it's been highly regarded by kids and the parents who have been part of it. And as I remember, we started this in part because we thought it would be a model for enrichment, ultimately as a way, it's sort of a pilot for what else can we do in a larger scale if we ever going to do something to enrich and get kids away from their phones and get kids into the kind of things. So we'd be losing something that is, from a curricular educational point of view, a pretty powerful experience, but not arguing against, I'm just saying it's a hard one to give into.
Which is why, if you jump down a few lines, what you will see in the other lines are items that the board could certainly look at to offset anything in the top section. And then again, there's a lot of blank lines because we always come into this meeting expecting that you will have ideas that we're not moving forward as well. But all of that's exactly right.
Yeah, for me, that's a tough one. That's one of my favorite days coming back from summer into these meetings is getting the report from the teachers and the students. It's a valuable addition. Now, what about our students who need summer support? So, I want to make it clear to the public and to everybody here on the board that we are not talking about
Extended school year.
Extended school year.
That is exactly right. Those are in place and those will happen and those will be provided this year. Additionally, there will be summer learning for teachers that is provided this year with real life students. In that setting, however, we're talking about a really small number of volunteer students. We're talking about 20 to 40 possibly not being offered as a student learning opportunity. It's a teacher learning opportunity, but we know that teachers learn best when they're looking at teaching and learning with real students involved. And so that by no means offsets the student impact of a reduction like this. And again, I'll probably say this 15 times tonight and I'll apologize. But we will be hard pressed to recognize $835,000 of reductions tonight without real student impact, even with a $500,000 starting point. It is just difficult to recognize a 1.2, 1.25% decrease to our budget that we moved forward and not have student impact. And so again, we're trying to shift it into a summer rather than during the mandated school year on that item. Other items you'll see other items drift back into impact on school year, either by reducing support or by delaying things that we thought were exciting design options for this year.
So it's context. We originally, the budget that just got voted down was a 4.79%, of which 3.5% was due to inflation and contractual obligations.
The way that I presented it to this community, yes.
So the additional 1.4% or something is what we're playing with, and now we just got reduced 1% of that.
And what you will notice is that a lot of the reductions that we're bringing forward tonight were not necessarily items that we listed on the investment slide. That investment slide that I shared during the original presentation, I believe totaled $882,000. We could have simply said anything that was new is going to go, and we would have gotten right to the point we need to be at tonight. We think some of the new investments are so important that we're bringing other reductions forward tonight for discussion so that we don't just cut off any new idea.
That's the context of it.
Yep. Yeah, we think that's really important.
Another simple question regarding summer pathways. If we reduce the program to 2 weeks, what would we see the impact on the cost? Would we see the cost cut in half?
It wouldn't be quite cut in half, and I also fear that we wouldn't be able to staff it.
Right. I fear that we would lose. It's a difficult one.
Easy question to ask. I mean, it's an easy question to ask, a more difficult question to answer. There's no doubt about it.
Right.
Again, because it's on the list, it deserves the discussion.
But qualitatively,
Correct.
it's not having a program. I mean, even 4 weeks is, I would call minimal. So cutting it in half might say, even if we could save money, may not be worth it.
Not worth it.
And we might lose our teachers to other out-of-district opportunities that were more beneficial for them looking for summer work.
Yeah.
Moira, I see I'm so sorry. Moira, I see your hand raised.
Thank you. I just want to speak in strong support of sustaining this program. I think it has been hugely successful. I understand the concerns that it doesn't touch every student, but I would guarantee that largely the students who attend this program are either able to be enriched or able to really catch up on some learning loss that they might have experienced in the prior year or years. And I also think, a lot of folks that were planning on working at this program or supporting this program have those plans in place. That's not a reason to cancel something, but it's something to be thoughtful. But I just wanted to voice my strong hope that we can maintain this program and identify some cuts in some other areas. So that's all.
What are the grades that work with this Pathways program? What are the grade?
It has in the past been open to kindergarten through 12th grade. We found that high school students just weren't participating. So we did offer them the opportunity to volunteer with younger students this year in case there were a couple of kids who wanted to participate as well. But right now we're looking at a K-8 program, strongly K-6.
And it's 100 students out of how many in the district again?
It's a ballpark of 90 to 100 that we expect to enroll out of 3,000.
Yeah.
We're floating right around 3,000 this year.
I'm just gonna cut it right here and say I'm in favor of cutting the program unless it's a paid-for program.
And
I
that's
think
what
it's an easy one.
and that's what I would look to, regardless of the decision that we make, I think that is something we should look moving forward. If the program stays moving and we move forward with it, maybe a questionnaire for all the parents involved, because subsidizing this does seem like a really good opportunity. To your point, it's not hitting every single student. So maybe it turns into a pay to play, because it is 4 weeks in the summer where all parents, we know we're looking for really great opportunities for our kids. Rarely are they free. And so this might be a very good opportunity to recoup some of these costs.
I'm sitting here worried that I need to put a caveat on that I don't know if we have enough upfront time to make that shift and then still be up and running
Next year.
for next summer.
Oh,
It's-
I would.
This would be,
Yeah,
this would
thank
be,
you.
this
Right,
would be,
so
if we
People
move
might not know a
forward,
lot more about the details, but I worry about
if we
that.
move forward with this year, I think
Got it.
that we need to keep in mind, you've spelled out very, very clearly why this would be on a reduction side of a budget if we need to have this discussion.
Yep.
It would make sense then that if the program is working as successful as it is, you know,
That
polling
they would
our
defer
families to
the
understand
greater
exactly
costs,
how we
right.
could defer the costs.
Okay,
And I guess I would, yeah, it sounds like a couple of us agree. I don't think this is a consideration for this coming year,
No.
right? Like, it's just
Yeah,
not fair to
thank you.
people.
Just
People
wanted to
are
be clear.
signing
Thank
up.
you.
We have staff that are signing up. And I would, and I think I hear you saying, I would also suggest it's not a decision we make without getting some input from the folks who participate, right?
100%.
Like, I would want to move forward and then find that we lose half the student
It's not a
interest.
program if we lose over 50.
Yes.
That's right.
Yeah.
So it's something I would like to,
I appreciate that. Thank you.
um,
I could keep going, right? I mean,
yeah, why don't, I'm gonna suggest, and we are gonna come around probably to any number of these as we continue. Because I'm hearing a couple of different viewpoints on that one, but if you move
Yep.
forward with other ideas, that'd be great.
so this budget, as it stands before the reduction, includes 5 new paraprofessional positions. In fact, we talked about this budget had sort of a priority around non-certified positions. This reduction would reduce 5 new positions to 2 new positions. It's a reduction of 3. It would be leaving 2 new additions in the budget. To be clear, if paraprofessional positions are identified as being necessary for the support and servicing of student PPTs, those would be added whether they're in the budget or not. And so this one comes with some degree of risk. And we've done that before when we've talked about the tuition line. We know that there have been years in the past where we've had increased student need and have needed to add unbudgeted paraprofessional positions. So if we were to take this reduction, it would be a real reduction. It would reduce the line item. We would go forward next year expecting to increase by 2, but know that if the need became clear, we would continue to add up to 5 or beyond 5 if student needs demanded it and if PPTs approved those additions. So again, this is a bit of a budgetary number, and we have covered unbudgeted expenses in the past. And so that's the logic in the paraprofessional approach that you see.
So
That's-
I'm so sorry, may I ask a quick question?
Sure.
So those 3 that are on a possible cut list are not, I presume then, attached to a potential student next year?
Not at this time. No,
Okay.
those were 5 positions that we expected to expand into.
Right,
And likewise, those are positions that are not currently filled. This reduction does not reduce in 3 layoffs of
Right.
existing employed paraprofessionals. It turns 5 new vacancies into 2 new vacancies for expansion.
Can you talk about the likelihood of filling all 5 vacancies? I know that we've had a challenge filling them at all.
We have struggled keeping the current level of paraprofessional positions filled this year. As soon as we get them filled, we end up with new vacancies that we're informed about. At this moment in time, Linda, I think we're sitting on a couple vacancies. I think there's still 2 that we're currently trying to fill at the current level. On the other hand, if we're following educational news around the state, we know that districts like Hartford are reducing 400 positions this year because as their ESSER dollars expire. And so there may be some short-term relief around teacher shortage and around paraprofessional positions as folks who were funded by ESSER and other communities lose those positions. They may become available to fill positions here in Guilford. That is all speculation, but I'm hopeful that we will have the opportunity to fill positions.
But I remember our earlier discussions about adding paras. We were adding paras at that number 5. Because there was an urgency, there's a need to have them with regard to students. So if we could get them, what we're really doing is cutting paras for students.
We're not cutting existing paras.
No.
We're anticipating the
But we
continued.
budgeted it because we thought we
Yes.
needed, if we could get them, but we really needed them.
And if we
could.
need them, we're gonna get them
Anyway,
anyway.
we were
We're
budgeting
gonna have to
5
make
based on
reductions on the
the
spot.
patterns that we're seeing and based on the projection that we're seeing. They're not 5 positions that will leave us uncovered for any existing needs. But yes, we were projecting them because the pattern in the in the direction we're moving indicates that we will likely need them. And then, Mr. Delaventure, you're exactly right. If that pattern plays out and if we still need them, we will hire them anyway. And we will have to figure out a way to hire 1 or 2 or 3 additional ones and find within the existing budget ways to cover those, as we've had in the past.
And are these potential paras? I'm sorry, did you?
It's okay. No,
Go.
go
No,
ahead.
you've been getting cut off on that. Go.
It's been a quick night. I'm absolutely against cutting any paras, and I will say why. For years at the annual meeting with the teachers, all we've heard about is special ed. They need more help. They need more assistance in the classroom. This is the bare minimum we can do for the classroom teachers to help support them during the school year to help our children. So I think these are absolutely necessary, and I don't think they should be cut at all.
But would not be hires. These would not be hires until we need them, correct?
Yes, even all 5, right? 5 would be in the budget. We would not fill those positions until they became absolute necessities because of student need that is being identified. And again,
Right.
the para number is always,
I do.
it's always a flexible
And it-
number,
and
and it's
it-
driven
yeah,
directly
I get
by
it.
student need and often by PPT decision.
And my question is, are these potential students that with a para stay in-house as opposed to potentially might be outplaced students in which the cost would be significantly higher? Like, are we talking about that?
Trading.
Are we, is that a potential situation that might occur?
Difficult to say hypothetically, but in any of those cases, that is absolutely where we would make the decision to hire and provide services in-house
Right.
before we chose to send a student.
Whereas the
And
choice
again-
to send out of district would be an incrementally more expensive expense.
Likely, but also it's important to know that all of those decisions are specific, child specific,
Sure.
made at the PPT, and the parents are part of those PPT
Yeah, understood.
conversations.
Yeah.
But in almost every case, the school district and the parents would rather have the child stay in a home school with supports locally before looking at placing a child out of district. So there would be a lot of motivation to do exactly what you just said.
So am I understanding, that sounds like new information to me a little bit. Am I understanding it correctly that these 5 positions would technically not be filled at all? We would still have the budget line item for them, but they wouldn't be filled until an actual specific need was presented?
Correct, which is
Okay,
how we
that's
fill paraprofessional positions
Okay.
related to special ed services every year.
Okay.
We don't
So
just
it's
fill
best
them.
guess.
Yes,
It's, okay, got it.
yep, it's a
Thank you.
budgetary number
But if
that
we
we
don't
hold.
have any increase, then they wouldn't get filled
So,
anyway.
Correct.
in a sense, then it's kicking the can down the road.
It's exactly what it is.
Yep.
It is
Well,
a
with-
budgetary
with the rate.
decision.
Yeah, right.
And is there any expectations that we have graduating seniors that have paraprofessionals that they're working with, that those would now become part?
Has all been taken into Mr. Scanziano's calculations for this year. So
Okay.
yes, so as Mr. Scanziano prepares his budget for every year, when you look at outplaced tuitions, transportation costs, existing paraprofessional staffing, it is all built on the students that we know are graduating out, the students who are currently enrolled, moving up a grade level, essentially, students from preschool moving into kindergarten service. Yes, all of that is taken into account.
Okay.
And again, the increase of 5 was based on this pattern and projection of increasing need that we're seeing during school years. It was not because we know we need those 5
Yeah, no, to
positions
Jen's
today.
point, this is what we hear, yeah.
Hi, Moira, did you want
Yeah.
to say something?
No, I just wanted the clarification that at the end of the day, if these 5 positions aren't filled, that's a surplus that we've allocated of spending. So I
Right.
guess the decision is whether we don't allocate for them now, we
Right,
do make the reduction, or, you know, we hit a position, a point some next time next year where you need 2
That's
additional
particularly
paras.
Yes,
that's right.
Behind that.
And
I'm
it's
just being
right,
clear, I just want to be very clear.
No,
These are
right.
Kind of hypothetical needs. We
Well,
don't have that.
I think that,
Like as John.
Projected.
I think, yeah.
I think projected's a
I
little
think
more
not
solid than
hypothetical,
hypothetical.
I think probably planned or projected,
Correct.
much like Jason and Linda
Tuition.
spend hours on tuition numbers, right? Because we need to plan for these things. It's the best guess at planning.
And actually, maybe the best example is the contracted services line that we build is exactly the same. We know that students will need services and supports in Guilford Public Schools. And so we will often contract BCBAs, behavioral supports and specialists for students out of that line. We can anticipate how much of that need we will have. We budget for it. But if the student needs aren't there, we don't go ahead and sign those contracts and put them out just because of the budget. And these staffing positions are different in that they're staffing positions, but will be filled in very much the same way.
Okay. All right, and then.
The drama teacher is very much different. The drama teacher
Right.
is one specific instructional position that would allow Adams Middle School to change the way that they schedule and provide specials at Adams to do more of a high school model rather than an elementary model. There was a lot of excitement around this idea. By making that reduction, we will not be moving forward with that new idea. We will maintain the status quo around the way specials are provided at Adams, and you will very likely see this from us next year. It is deferring an investment and what we think would be an instructional enhancement because it's now no longer an advantageous year to do that in the face of this kind of reduction. Completely different than the logic that we just applied to the para positions.
All right.
And maybe therefore makes it a little bit easier. The Transition Academy, we've spoken to you about the success of the Transition Academy and the possibility of needing a larger space. There's $50,000 in the budget to help us search for and find that new location. This reduction means that we would continue to stay in the program that we're currently in. It fits the students that we have programmed for next year. It will limit our ability to expand the program this year. It will not decrease the quality of the programming that we offer to the students this year. It does just put a cap on the ability to offer more students opportunities into that program this year. We will stop searching for a new location. We will put this off for a year, and we will probably come back next year with the suggestion that we should be looking and might have started generating a wait list at that time, because this year we'll be unable to expand. My anticipation is that the wait list would be for students in other communities who want to come and take advantage of us as a placement. We would not say to a local Guilford student, we can't meet your needs because there isn't space in the academy. We would either find space in the academy or place that student elsewhere if that was the only option, and then bring that student back when we were able to expand seats at the Transition Academy.
I think that's such a good way of going about it. I think we're all advocates of this academy. I mean, that's, but what you're getting at and what we all talked about and what this 50K allows us to do is potentially turn it on its side and allow it to generate money.
Yes.
Right. And so if we could get to a position in which we have a runway of 1 year to find the location, start vetting, potential families for this location, you could then potentially come to us at some time next year saying, it's 50K, it's going to generate this though.
It's a possibility.
In which we could very easily, add that into the budget, knowing that it's a revenue generator.
Yes, we just think that at this point, we're not that far in the process, and
that's
so
totally
therefore it
understandable.
becomes an easy reduction at this time.
And actually was never intended to be a moneymaker.
Exactly.
It just has turned into something that people are seeking us out.
It's become, we think, an opportunity, but yes. The reduction of the 0.5 custodian is just simply going to be telling Mr. Gurnham and his team that they have to continue covering the square footage that we have with the existing staff. There are some areas where we're running behind. We think that this is justified, but again, we need to delay this for a year while we wait to grow the custodial staff. You will notice that the HVAC maintainer is not here, and that is because your budget as it stands shows an offsetting reduction in contracted hours and expenses. And that's different than a custodian. The custodians are doing needed work. We'll be stretching the existing team, right? There may be some spaces that are getting done every other evening rather than every evening, but it doesn't have offsetting savings. It's an investment, and Mr. Gurnham has been told that it's likely one he will have to wait for. And then finally, the professional services line. Professional services, did I misspeak with professional services, or is that the right line for this? Right. No. So professional services is a catch-all line that does include some services like the annual audit that is required and that is done of our accounting in-house, but it also includes some professional development services like the special education study that we contracted this year.
So this is page 60, correct?
It's the professional and technical services.
Okay,
Line.
okay, yep.
And so this is a place where we believe that we can absorb that reduction, and we will make tougher choices this year about what contracts we can engage in. I think it has been it was beneficial for us that the special education work is behind us, because if it was something that we had been slating for next year, it's likely. But if we're looking at possibly, I have been engaged in some conversations locally about redoing a study around start time. I've been talking about busing services, and there are some really interesting AI opportunities to engage in that conversation. I've been engaged with one company looking at proposals. There will be proposals that get suggested this year that, because of a reduction like this, I would have to say it's a good idea, but we need to wait a year. We don't have the funds available. So again, it is a budget line reduction, and we'll make careful decisions moving forward to live within the remaining budget if we make that reduction.
So the special ed study is complete, because just knowing from what we're hearing about from the teachers and even from the community, that I'd like to see that study complete. So
it's nearing completion, and my early understanding is that it's not going to be what we're hearing from, so part of the study was that oftentimes I am saying that we've got really positive case sizes and staffing, and continuing to hear it's not enough, it's not enough. So we wanted an outside opinion. So they're almost done with data collection. I have yet to see a first draft of it. Mr. Scanziano's not here tonight, but I believe they were just wrapping up focus groups meeting that they were doing with the parents and some other constituencies. We will have a report before the end of the school year.
and that was my question. So when you're talking about these other consultant fees, that study will be done and paid for and complete.
Yes, thank you.
And not
Yep.
in next year's budget.
Yes, exactly. But I may have to shelf some early conversations about doing one about busing routes again and getting some really interesting AI technology to look at our bus routes for us. I have been having conversations with some community members, and I've actually started talking to some companies. A reduction of this magnitude tonight will make it harder for me to fund some of the things that I've been discussing, but not the special ed study. That one is committed to and will be paid in full, and we will have a report. Right?
Yes.
Okay.
Excuse me, Katie. Could I
Yes,
just interject for a
absolutely.
second?
Yes, I'm trying to keep looking at you, and I'm not always going to do it. Go right ahead.
It's quite all right. Dr. Freeman, I just want to be clear of the line for, the increase is going from, in terms of the professional technical services, other consultants was at 19,750 and it's up to 71,500. How much of that is the special ed study? Do you have a general idea?
About 40. Yeah, it was 40, I believe.
In addition to what's already been spent, or on the study? I just want to understand the entire costs of the study.
It was approximately 80,000, 40 out of the current year, 40 out of next year.
So
sorry,
40, did you hear that? So 40,
80,000 spread across 2 budget years.
so 40 would be in next year's. So this 70, anyone's going to correct me if I'm wrong, the 71,500 that's listed here as proposed, 40 of that is the special education study, which leaves 31,500, and the proposal here is to reduce by 30.
Right. Now, to be really fair, as we close the books every June, we look at unspent other lines. If we have an opportunity to pay off this entire 80 this year, and then then that reduction next year, there's a wash, and maybe we can still do a transportation study next year.
Yep.
So you know that we work really hard to limit unspent budgeted dollars in this budget. Now, this year may be slightly different because there was a medical surplus in this year's budget as well. We're not going to spend dollars unnecessarily, but that's exactly the kind of place where when we get to June, if we can pay off the entire 80 this year rather than carrying 40 into next year's budget, it's a non-recurring cost, and we would carefully and thoughtfully do that.
Question for you about
I
that.
just want to add to that, start time is kind of getting a resurrection around the state, the conversation, and I think it is critically important. So I'm glad to know that was, I didn't know that was part of that line.
Really early conversations. It's not committed to that line yet.
I
I'm
think
sorry,
it is
Mark.
something that we do need to be thinking about. And on a state level, I think it's a conversation that you're going to start hearing more about. So we're just gonna add that in, but if there's some savings that we can recognize from that line somehow, like to what you just spoke to, that would be good news.
Great. My own 2 cents, sorry, is that I would love to have the state talking about this. Those of us who are around for the first time know how.
The scars.
Well, it's just so frustrating because there were many thoughtful conversation pieces around school start times in this community, and not all of them are addressed by a statewide approach, but many are.
Yes.
But anyway, thank you, Maura. That's helpful. Okay, so these,
Question.
yeah, go ahead.
You mentioned transportation and AI. It came up in our caucus this weekend. When is our bus contract up for renewal?
We just did a 3-year extension, so this is the first year of the 3-year extension.
So we have two
Two
full
more
school
years.
years. So 1 year out, we'll start talking about the next contract then again.
Okay.
When we get to the last year of this existing contract.
Yeah, and you bring up AI, and I just wonder how many transportation vendors are actually using AI as a tool to actually solicit, contracts, because that's certainly something that they could be using on their end as well, as opposed to an investment that we would be making.
Yep.
So.
So the items that I just went through and spoke to total 335,000, and they represent what we would suggest as the least distasteful places to make this reduction. Obviously, as we went through those items, there were some that seemed like easier decisions and some where individual board members said, I'd prefer not to go in that direction. So I can also speak, Dr. Balstracy, to the other items, which I would prefer not to elevate, but I also recognize that this is not my decision. And all of those other items deserve conversation and should be discussed. And so I'd be happy to run through those as well. Any one or any number of those could be taken and would then allow the board not to take items that we've already discussed in the first cluster of items.
I think it's important that we do, because some of them are on our own list that we've generated ourselves.
And again, a lot of blank lines, because we
Yeah,
did not,
no, I think
we
that's
did
right.
not assume that we thought of everything coming to this meeting. The budget that moved forward from the administration to the board originally included making permanent 6 new safety monitor positions. Those were reduced from 4 to 2 new positions. And early thinking is that holding on, right, there were 2 in the budget previously, there were 6 new ones that are in place here today. Early thinking was that maintaining 4 would allow us to maintain 2 at the high school, 1 at Adams, and 1 at Baldwin, with those 4 existing positions. The logic of this reduction would be to reduce 2 new positions to only 1, and that would allow us to maintain 1 of these positions at the high school, 1 at Adams, and 1 at Baldwin. It does not, in this approach, it doesn't provide any of that additional support at the elementary level. The board had discussed that we may come back, the administration may come back to the board with some kind of creative suggestion around how to maintain some level of support at the elementaries. If we make this reduction from 2 FTEs to 1 FTE, it strains and makes any of that creativity less likely, and we may end up falling to the simple solution rather than a more creative, complex, nuanced solution. So again, safety monitors were a big part of conversation, and just because we've noted 1 here doesn't mean that the board couldn't choose to eliminate both and simply return us to when we had 2 hall monitor positions that were both located at the high school. For purpose of conversation, we've added the 1.
Can I ask you a question? You have 53,000 here, and that sounds
Hi.
high. Based on, I thought there were 38 a piece, and I'm looking for the page in our very large book.
I'll have to defer to Linda, and I may very well hear it wrong.
need a table of contents. Did somebody find it?
It's page 50.
Thank you.
So page 50, but then there was something in the handouts that we received.
No, this is right, page 50, right? So, when we reduced, Baldwin, 38,184, Adams, 38,184 for one, high school, 76,368 for two.
So
So I just want to know, it
this
should be
number should be,
38.
it should be 38,
It
not
should be
53,
38.
and I apologize,
No,
that was
no,
my error.
apologize.
Nope.
This is.
No, I got
why we're in
To be exact, 38,184.
Yeah, okay.
somewhere else in our packets, and I don't
Yep.
know where, because I got the numbers from one of the, so on the last time we had to come back with budget cuts. You
That,
had six safety monitors at a total of 250,000, which was $41,667 each.
so
Which
that
But
was
there are various.
probably
prices.
my error that long ago, and it got carried forward.
But then somewhere else in our packets, two safety monitors equaled $105,000. I don't remember where now, because I didn't write that page.
And that's
number down.
probably where I created my, right, I drew that same information, creating my error on your
So
sheet tonight.
there's a couple of safety monitors that work different hours. The principals didn't want the full, so a safety monitor can go from 33,411 up to the 38,184.
Okay.
And I think there was some rounding happening
Right.
when we did
Okay.
the original reduction, so.
So I'm gonna suggest for this suggestion, we put in a 38, we can put in a 38,000 or 38,184, which would reflect the four remaining safety monitors in the book, because we took out the four
Right.
Elementary school equivalents
Yeah.
when we voted on February 5th.
And again, the board could reduce by one, it could reduce by two, and which would bring us back to the starting point.
Right.
And when we made the initial reduction, we had suggested that this would that the administration might come back with a more creative way on how to use the dollars rather than strict full one
Right.
FTEs.
And
Now,
we were
again,
fine
cutting
with
it in
that.
half, but cutting it in half would restrict the ability to be
Which really,
creative.
really,
Yes.
really stick that, yep.
And
Okay.
is there conversation around excess ARPA funds being used for something like this if the
Yes.
funds are available?
Yeah, for 1 year only, there was some suggestion that the town had access to some ARPA funds that could be used for 1 year only. I do not know at this moment in time if that has changed because of the reduction that is occurring at the town side.
Okay.
So once the board makes your decision tonight, I will need to follow up with Mr. Hoey and find out if that suggestion
I want to
continues.
make a request
Yep.
that the board finds out about this before it's put in place.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes, without question.
All right.
Thank you.
And I just, oh, sorry.
Okay,
I think everybody knows where I stand on this, that I want both of them cut, because by my calculation for two of them, that's in the area of $78,000, that is equivalent of 3 paras, which directly impacts our kids, and that's how I'd always like to see the money spent.
okay, so
Right.
noted. All right, Dr. Amy, do you want to go through just the rest of these proposals?
Yep.
And then we can start talking, okay?
Site improvement is always going to be an assumed liability. We talk every year about wanting to grow site improvement. We have not worked back to the 1% that we set as the target. However, I felt it needed to be here because we recognized a redundancy in bonding and then in site improvement dollars that were targeted for the 595 project. The board has already reduced site improvements by $30,000.
Yep.
But that redundancy totaled closer to $90,000. And so
Right.
there are dollars there. Now, to be clear, if the money for the 595 project was located out of bonding, which has happened, that doesn't mean that we've got an extra 90,000 that we don't need in site improvements. We're still short of the 1% target. So it means projects that would otherwise be deferred or put off would actually be addressed next year. But again, when looking at a reduction of this magnitude, I felt that site improvement needed to be discussed. And obviously the $50,000 is a placeholder. It could be 60,000 to get to the full 90. It could be 100,000 if we felt that our backs were against the wall and we were willing to defer maintenance of the facilities in order to Ms. Baldwin's point, to protect services that go to kids. And at times that decision gets made. When that decision gets made year over year, you start digging a hole
Yes,
that is really
that's
difficult
exactly
to
right.
get out of. And we've been
and
really
expensive
careful.
later on.
Yes, and we've been
More
really
expensive.
careful about not doing that.
Yep.
The athletic facilities and expenses that we have noted here would
All right.
primarily, I'm sorry.
Sorry, go back to site improvements real quick.
Yep.
What is our total allocated for the fiscal year coming up?
The site improvement
Yeah.
line at the moment is
Okay.
604,000, which is represents an increase over last year of 142,000. Although we have been over budget on that line for several years.
Because we've already made the $30,000 reduction.
This,
Okay.
and this represents the 30, this
So-
142 increase, $142,000 increase does account already for the 30,000 we took out on February 5th.
Yeah, I wanna make it clear, we've, in 23-24, we were at 462,000. 24-25 requested was originally 634,000. Our proposed original decrease, increase was 172. We've cut 30, we're at 142
Right.
with an additional 90 that we have in bonding that created a redundancy in funds.
But, right, we could
Well, we've
easily
taken
find
30 of
project,
that
yeah,
out.
we've taken 30 of
We've
that out
taken 30,
already.
so it,
Right.
that was representing an extra 60, right? Because at the time of the conversation, we determined because this line is over, we wouldn't take
Right.
the full 90 out.
Okay. And I've mentioned to the
I see you,
board,
Maura. Hold on, please.
I've actually mentioned to the board that I believe in the future, we're not going to be coming forward with an itemized list because the itemized list is misleading. When we put an itemized list forward for site improvements, it suggests, it communicates that this is exactly what we're going to do. And so if we decide that one of those projects isn't important or necessary, well, then it's extra money. It's never extra money because the backlog,
Never enough.
backlog of projects, that's harder to say than I thought it would be, is always pushing on us. And so creating this specific itemized list from the really large list, including the backlog, is, I think, creating a misinterpretation. So I think in the future, we're going to create categories of maintenance and projects that will be completed with this budget allocation. Things like bathroom improvements, tile replacements, carpet replacements, ceiling tile replacements, all the things that go into keeping us up to date and not creating that maintenance hole that you would otherwise create.
Right.
And I'm sorry, everyone's cutting Moira off.
No,
Myself.
nobody's cutting Moira. Go ahead, Moira.
Thank you. Historically, I'm always a proponent of building up this line, but I feel like this is an opportunity where we could be making some additional savings. I would much rather take a like to have project, out of the budget for this year than touch like our summer program where we're impacting children and teachers and that experience. So I just want to voice that, I understand you don't like us to look at the line items and the project list and stuff, but there are some things in there that are like to have. I don't see them as maintenance items. So I just wanted to express that believe me, I wish we could always build this line as strongly as we can, but when we're in a situation like this, it would be helpful actually to kind of look at line items. I do want to express, the 595 project, while important, is very expensive. And we're, because it's kind of been delayed over a few years, it's just the cost is growing. And so I want to put out there that I would love to see us be creative and smart and maybe find some additional savings here, not touching the maintenance parts because I know how critical that is, but some of these like to haves.
Can I just ask a weird question? And I don't know that I definitely don't know the answer to this, which is why I'm asking. I know that there's like woodworking classes and there's some kids doing that sort of stuff. Has there been any thought about maybe having students do some of the work over at 595 as helping them build their resume if this is a line they're going to go into, like contractors and woodworking? And it might also be applicable to their MBDA. So has there been any thought? I'm just throwing that out there. It's just something that came to me today.
I'm not sure that we could. One of the cost increases was because it was identified that the project needed to be prevailing wage and needed to go to labor, unionized labor. And so I think for that reason, no, it would probably be very unlikely that we'd be able to utilize any sort of creative student support.
I just see that as such a missed opportunity. That's unfortunate.
One of the cost increases is that we thought the project was small enough that it would not have to be bid at prevailing wage. And then we realized once the bids went out that it did need to be prevailing wage. And that was one of the cost increases we absorbed.
All right, and you have four, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Can I add something?
Sure.
So just so you know, what typically happens with the site improvement is when we start the budget in September, October, Mr. Gurnham puts together a list of projects. When it comes time to start doing them, he doesn't do the ones that are the nice to haves right away. So at the start of the school year, he puts those off. Almost every year, we have had so many things come up, unanticipated expenses that we have to do. Water main breaks, pipes
That's why we've been
breaking.
over the last couple of years.
We're $118,000 over budget right now on this line.
Right.
And it's not, none of these projects are the nice to haves. He regularly cuts down on the carpet replacement and tile replacement because those monies are being used for some other project. So I just want to clarify that it's not always, you know, these nice to have projects that are getting done out of site improvements.
Not a discussion for tonight, and since I've been on the board for 12 and a half years, it could be a very long time ago. But I remember sitting in meetings where there was kind of a 10-year plan. I don't know where we are in that plan, and this
Very
is
much
where
at the end of that.
I'm quite sure we're close, but I would love to.
It gets updated, if there is one.
But one of the things we can do in a future operations committee
It's an
meeting,
outside study, yes.
well, or just ask Cliff about his process as well, just because I mean, we know a lot of it, he shared it, but it's always good to know, like, not only how does he think over the next year, but how does he think over the next 5 years, and right, because that's what is required.
And Mr. Gurnham always keeps a 10-year, we've got a 10-year lookout. But my point is that the outside facilities study, I think we're at the end of that outside study that we had completed.
Yeah.
And it is probably worth, as Adams approaches 90 years old,
Yeah.
right? At some point, we're going to need to take an eyes wide open look at a 90-year-old facility and
Right.
talk about how much do we continue investing in that facility moving forward. Are we going to be back 10 years saying it's pretty soon going to be turning 100 years old, and how long do we continue investing in it?
Right.
Anyway, site improvement we knew was going to create this kind of conversation, but we felt it needed to be part of the conversation this evening. Athletics, facilities, and expenses. This very much is speaking to the overtime investment that we have been making in pool time and ice time. Specifically, the $30,000 number would get us to the point that we believe that we would be paying the full cost of ice and pool access. Now, some of the parents involved have slightly different accountings and think that it's close, but not all the way there. But it has taken 30 years for the hockey team for us to be able to say that we want to take on the full cost. We did this a couple of years ago where we thought we were going to take the whole cost and then we cut it down to half. And then this year, this was supposed to be the second half. So to be clear, reducing or eliminating this number kind of begins unwinding a commitment that we've made to the hockey families.
Yep.
They know it's not a promise. They understand. And I believe that budgeting is a year-to-year process and it depends on voters, and we've never promised, but we have committed to keep working on it. So again, it's new monies in this year, but it's monies that are part of a long tail in trying to be able to say that we provide all of the athletic facilities, not just the ones that we own locally. And so it's here. I think it needs to be here. I'm not recommending that this is one of the places that we go, but I thought it needed to be named to be fair in the process.
Yeah, you're right to put it in there. I think ultimately, these are the people we heard from.
Yes.
You know, we heard them loud and clear. I think we all want to get there. This would take a step back. I think ultimately, I know we're going to all have differing opinions here, but like, this is where I would not start. And strictly for the fact that this is what's being asked for. You know, when we solicit input, this is what we're getting. We'd like to listen for reductions and additions. we don't hear reductions. We hear a lot of additions.
Right.
Right. And so we have to go off of what we're hearing. Right. We also heard something very differently at the polls. Right. And so I think this is a balance of listening to our constituents at the polls, but then also listening to the people that took the time out of their lives to come here and advocate for additional spending.
Year over year.
Yes.
Not just one time. These families have been coming out multiple years and have been patient with us taking small bites out of this problem.
Yeah.
Again, for the hockey families for 30 years.
Yeah.
And so I completely agree.
Yeah,
Okay.
it also violates the principle that we've been talking about for 3 years.
Mhm.
Parents should not have to pay extra money for core athletic costs. And so we've gotten to the point where parents, in most cases, don't have to be taxed for normal sport, and ice time is part of so if we take it out, we'll have violated, forget whether the parent showed up or not. The lobbying was there, but the principle says we should be doing that independent of who showed up at the meeting. That's all I'm saying.
If I can't kind of relate it to that, I just noted on page 82 of the book, athletic supplies, where this is used for uniforms and supplies of athletic teams and apparel for coaches. I believe at this point, all the teams are up to date with the Grizzlies logo.
Mhm.
Yes, I think all the high school teams, yes, yes.
So I'm wondering if there's a way that we could maybe do like a cut on that line. You know, maybe the coaches have to wear
It's on my list.
every year.
It's on my list.
Maybe there could be more of an accounting, and maybe there could be a reduction in that line.
That is a relatively new increase, and I will say that that is a decision that Mr. Jardison that I came to, and a lot of it had to do with community conversations around the coaching staff and our concern about keeping coaching. I was in a conversation earlier today where I made clear that while the coaches are paid, they're essentially volunteer programs. And so the idea behind this was to say that if you're going to be a 23-24 coach in Guilford Public Schools, that there's going to be some 23-24 coaching apparel that nobody has unless you are a Guilford varsity coach in that year. And beyond the $3,000 stipend that you get, that there is a way to appreciate and value those coaches. So yep, it's why it's there. I didn't put it on my list, but it is certainly something. I would feel bad because it's only been in the budget for a year or two. And I get a lot of nice notes from the coaches who say, I very much appreciate being thought of.
But this is a $335 cut.
Totally get that.
Well, so what I see, here's what I see historically, right? So it's in the current year for $58,000, right? It's in the upcoming budget for $72,000. So it's a significant increase. It's a 24% increase, right? And so, when we're talking about, some of the items that we've put forward, right? I look at that as an opportunity to say, we're still increasing it significantly.
And that is specifically why the item is listed as facilities/expenses, because Linda did not allow me to put ice and pool time on the list. It needed to be broader. And so should a decision be made in that, I just wanted you to understand the rationale.
No, that's
Should
fair.
we go in that direction? It could be absorbed out of the expenses
Because we could
side,
take,
not touch ice and water.
take this new $14,000.
Yep.
And bring the total budget down to something in the range of $60,000, if we needed to, or $65,000, right? So it's an increase. It's a significant increase still for
And
the
still
calendar
work
year.
to make sure the coaches feel appreciated.
I'm
yes.
so sorry, I lost the page. Could you tell me?
82.
82. You just said it and I.
That's okay.
So. Sorry, now I need to get there.
It's minimal, but I see like $7,000 being able to come out of that line to get us to where we need to get to without having a huge impact.
Yes. I'll jump on, I'm sorry.
But I'm sorry, so my only question though is funds budget accounting, uniform supplies for all athletic teams and apparel for coaches.
It would essentially come out of coaching apparel.
Okay,
And it is still an increase from last year's budget.
and I'm not saying anything on balance. I will say, as the wife of someone who has been an assistant coach in several school districts, he figured out his
Don't do it. You never calculate your hourly rate.
hourly rate one day. It was not pretty. No.
And these
You
funds
can
are not
use
touching,
one
they're not touching the
hand.
pay.
You
This
can
is,
use one hand to count the dollars
It
per
is-
hour
it is
that these
not the
people
stipend they pay.
give.
this will not
to
touch
our
our coaches'
students.
pay though.
Not salaries.
Yeah.
Nope.
I just want to acknowledge that a little extra going their way is not a bad thing. They don't make any money for doing a lot of good.
The two paraprofessionals here, I think we've talked about already, right? But
Yeah,
the
This
idea
is
here.
two instead of,
Yes,
right,
the idea here would we reduce the new 5, not by 3, but by all 5. And again, it would bring us to status quo, but if they're needed, they're going to be filled. We have
Okay.
to, we're obligated to.
Yep.
The textbooks, again, would be a line item reduction. Now, the board has recently seen teachers who have come forward. It might mean saying to a request, not this year, we can't do it this year. It might be able to come out of rebinding and new copies without eliminating titles, but it would mean that Dr. Goss and the principals and the department heads would be a little tougher on textbook purchases. It would be $20,000 tougher. It wouldn't be the end of the world. It would be tightening that line slightly. And then the special education transportation line that you see there, again, we have projected, we think that the number we've put in the budget is a reasonable number, but we always tried to build in a little bit of contingency where we talk about transportation and contracted services and tuition in the special ed area. So this again would be reducing that budget item. And if we end up with students who require transportation, the transportation will be provided. It was a line item. We could be listing tuition and doing the same thing. And we're prepared to have that conversation should we choose to, but we didn't feel comfortable putting that item on this year's list. We feel that tuition is coming in pretty close right now. And while we could always make that decision, we didn't feel confident enough to put it on the list, but we'll entertain the conversation on that or any other suggestions that board members have as well. We know it's not an exhaustive list.
Okay, so what I'd like to do then now, so we have potentially some other things that we haven't talked yet about that people may want to introduce as possible items.
Or existing ones, I just.
That I would like to now give people the opportunity to do. Then what I'm going to propose is I'm going to try to lead us through some decision-making based a little bit on what I've heard thus far. And then encouraging further conversation, right? Because I think we have some items that are going to be more easily landed on than others.
Yep.
And then as we go along, identify where we are in the 835. So we know. So what I'd like to do then is ask if there are other items that haven't been discussed, you know, as John, as you mentioned, some of the things that Dr. Freeman has brought up. Others have thought of, but there are maybe additional things. So I want to open it up to my colleagues. Are there other things that they'd like to throw out as possibilities for consideration?
Listen, I'm very vocal tonight, sorry. I was looking at professional development on page 67, and I see that there's a significant increase in the district-wide PD. I'm all for PD. I don't want to have that mistaken. But we've been told that that's a lot of the job of the coaches that we have. And I'm wondering why there's such a big increase when we have these experts in our district. Maybe this year's the year to maybe use them more and do less outside. But you guys can speak better to that.
Yeah, I mean, I
context,
can
it's a
start by
10,000.
noting while Linda looks for the itemized list. So the idea of the coaches was never to eliminate right outside. So there's always going to be a need to bring in those outside experts. And oftentimes the real balance is between new learning that comes in and then the coaches are helping with implementation. And so often what happens sort of forever in education is that you would bring somebody in for a day or a few days, or you would go off and see a conference and there was absolutely no transfer. The coaches are there because they actually make the transfer possible. So when we purchase new math materials or new phonics materials, we get training that comes with the purchase, but then the coaches are helping with the actual implementation and transfer rather than here's the book, here's the 1 day of training, and then we cross our fingers to hope that something sticks. But that was all preamble as I'm waiting for information on what the increase, the item.
I think it's 10,000. I think Mr.
For
Delavecchio
district,
pointed that out.
it's a $10 addition. 10,000.
So little shy of 10,000.
But I'm just saying it's still very high in my opinion.
Overall, you're saying?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, so what's on the itemized list. So I would just argue that I don't see that as a significant number. When you're talking about 350 teachers, that it's not a significant amount. There were past years where we saw much larger contracts with IFL, for instance. We worked to bring that contract down over time. The coaches absolutely help with that, but they're never going to bring it down to a really minimal number.
I mean, vendors have raised their prices. We've
Yes.
seen a couple of price increases with our vendors. We didn't have any new initiatives that we rolled into the budget this year. So these numbers are all just indicative of numbers that were coming to us in quotes.
Okay.
This was not a change in programming or an increase.
Okay,
And I think
that's
that's what I
helpful to
kind of
know.
needed.
What
Yeah.
That's helpful to know.
Probably better than my answer, but I was vamping.
Moira, go ahead.
I'll just throw these out here so I don't bother you with raising my hands. One of the questions I had was around our legal line.
Yep.
I know we've been subjected to having more need for legal consultation, but there's a portion of that I'm imagining is labor and so labor negotiations. And I just want to understand, because based on our contracts, we really shouldn't be walking into a lot of long-term work in that area. So I wonder if there's some savings we could realize on that line, the legal line. And then around the dues line, I think we touched on that at the beginning. But
Well-
there's we talked about the partnership for educational leadership. That adds around a $30,000 price tag. And then the last thing I want to ask about was substitute teachers. I know we struggle even to fill those positions. Yet we have a line of $135,000. So those are just, I'm just gonna throw those out there.
Okay, and so,
Take a lot of time.
great, so I'm just gonna, take those one at a time. So, and Moira, correct me if I misspeak, right? So one of the things Moira's asking about is under legal services, the increase particularly, within the legal services, I'm looking at page 61 of the budget book, labor negotiations, increases, by about 37,000. So there's just a question, right, based on at least our understanding of where contract negotiations are, what ones we're in the middle of now, what ones we only recently completed. We also have watched the legal line be over budget for 2 years. So
Yep.
this is really a question.
So I think in large part, it's a correction of being over budget projected already, being over budget this year. And then I think there are some negotiations next
So
year.
next year, the custodial contract and the nurses contract both expire. So we'll be doing negotiations with them next year, both those groups next year.
Okay,
We are currently, for this year, working on 2
right.
and actually really.
And
just
one
started with
hasn't
them.
started yet,
Right.
right? So that's gonna carry.
Finish
And-
custodial. Didn't we just finish custodial like this time last year?
That's what I thought, but it expires in 25. It went on for a very long time before it was settled.
I think we settled late and it went retro.
Yeah,
Okay.
and the nurses was an entire year retro, so I think they both were.
Makes it feel a lot closer.
So we do in fact have 2 and potentially a third because it hasn't started yet and could potentially carry into July, August.
And are
Okay.
currently running again over expended.
Right, okay,
But, right, again, we made adjustments in legal the last 2 years in deference to the medical increases, which is why we're under this year. So while, again, when you're making these really forced choices, it may be a place that we could make a $5 or $10 or $15,000 reduction. It probably means we will run under again next year, but it is something that we could do if we needed to. You do that in a lot of places and then
no,
you end up
we want to
without
be very
room
careful.
to transfer late in the game.
Well, again, and I just appreciate these explanations because of course, as we're looking through the books, each of us and looking at increases and trying to remember, I agree with Kristen. I thought we had just finished because it felt like just
That feels like
yesterday.
it.
Having some explanation here is very helpful because then we know like whether we want to reconsider these thoughts. The second thing Moira mentioned was in dues, right, Moira?
Yes.
A question about dues.
66.
Specifically with partners and educational leadership.
Oh, yes.
So-
Yeah,
Partners provide services and some of those are scheduled as dues and some of those are our professional development. And so we mentioned at a Board of Education meeting recently where we actually contracted with partners for some work that Dr. Harrison did in the district. It was beyond his job description as family equity liaison. It was equity work specifically around implicit bias and microaggressions that he's done with districts all over the state. We wanted that same stuff delivered here, and we worked with partners, since their name changed, we partnered with partners on that work. Additionally, I have been part of the superintendent's network through Partners in Educational Leadership for going on 15 years now. And that is a group of superintendents who work collaboratively across the state. We have worked with Richard Elmore out of Harvard University. We've worked with Lee Title out of Harvard University. It's some of the best professional learning. And so that is one of the dues that's booked. Similarly, there is the School Improvement Network that focuses on assistant superintendents in the curricular area that Dr. Goss participates in. Dr. Crystal before her and Dr. Keene before her participated. And then most recently, we're participating in the networked improvement community, which is specific around math instruction. So now Dr. Goss and a team of administrators and teachers from the district are working with four other districts looking specifically at the building thinking classrooms model. So I wish we hadn't tabled that conversation at our last meeting, but they're specifically digging into work around the mathematics classrooms. And what I'm excited about is looking at Lily Adal's work and saying, how do we apply it in places other than just the math classroom? My whole career, we spent talking about good instructional PD and listening to math teachers say, well, that's fine, but that doesn't work in my subject area. For the first time in my career, we've got PD that's built and targeted towards math instruction and actually saying, while this was designed for math instructors specifically, it's really good teaching and we can be pulling it into other subject areas as well. And so those are the big sort of targets around. And I will note that as we've increased some of the work that we've done with partners in the last few years, you'll see a corresponding decrease in some of the time and dollars that are being directed toward the Institute for Learning. So we're still doing some work with IFL, but much less over the last several years while we're picking up more work with some other vendors. We're not just net increasing the services that are happening.
Okay. And
And I
then
just have there was a grant that covered that cost, and now for some reason we don't have the grant. Just trying to understand.
Was that the ESSER grant that was covering? So those were ESSER dollars that were covering that NIC, and the ESSER dollars have expired. And so we are moving that work into, and originally that NIC was looking on how to respond to the pandemic and come out of the pandemic. And that group naturally evolved into mathematics instruction, which I, again, find really exciting.
How much is that, those dues? Or are those dues? That's not English, that's not proper, sorry.
Was it 30,000?
I think it was 30.
Yeah.
So that would account for that was the significant increase I was thinking.
Which is a decrease of what we were spending when it was at. It's a decrease in what we were spending when it was ESSER dollars. The price tag was higher, and when the ESSER dollars went away, we made clear to partners that we'd like to continue the service, but they needed to work with us on the price, that we couldn't continue to do it in the loss of a grant with the loss of the grant.
okay. And then Moira, I think your last just question was around the substitute line.
Yeah.
And I know we've talked about it before, but if we could just hear about that again, because we know it's a large increase, but we also know there's increasing need and an increasing pay in order to attract subs, so we're not pulling teachers and gym teachers and other people into classrooms.
So the one thing that we are continuing to see is that we are continuing to see increased rates of teacher absence. And I want to be really clear, that is not unique to Guilford. That is happening across the board. But teachers are taking more time. You're seeing teachers using their contractually allowable sick time. And I think it's becoming, right, teachers are just using the time, right? We've still got COVID cases that are happening to employees and to their children. We've got SARS that's happening. Teachers are simply drawing more time. And so one is we need to be able to have enough dollars to provide subs when teachers are using sick time at the rate that we're seeing it being used. In addition to that, we're coming up short filling the positions. So while it's a little bit nickel and dime, we went back and changed sub rates this year, particularly trying to increase the rates for our own Guilford retired teachers to see if we can tempt some of them to come back and help us. But also looking at how we were compensating long-term subs as we have needs in that area as well. So the increased need for subs is exacerbating the fact that we may not pay as high as some of our neighboring communities, and we're in competition with neighboring communities. And it's right to your point that we would prefer to be able to bring the subs in and not have to pull a principal or pull another teacher or combine two classes together in order to be able to have them covered.
Okay.
And so while we're not really completely confident that we will be able to find all the subs that we need, we are committed to having the dollars available and at least crossing our fingers and hoping that some of our outreach to graduate programs locally and that possibly some of these ESSER reductions that are going to be hitting neighboring communities, that next year we might do better in filling the positions. And I do think that if we start filling the positions and stop stressing the system, we might with time start seeing the rate of teacher absence reduce as well.
Any other items that haven't been mentioned that anyone has a question about? Or
Special services. Special services is showing a 12.75% increase, or 130,000. So it's substantial. And just looking to better understand if there's, you know, again, we're looking at small bites at this, you know, and whether or not we could afford to take them. So, you know, is there something there that we could look into to, you know, this was not a breakdown, so we don't see exactly where that 130, that additional 130 is being spent. Overall, this is a total budget of 1.15 million.
So there's a number of different services that are in here, from BCBAs to nursing services to various evaluations. It's a long list of things that are covered in here. Just for some content, as of March 31st, we had spent $901,000. And so a lot of those bills probably were only, if we were lucky, through February. So we still have 4 months of invoices to record. We're seeing the cost increase on all of these services. So based on what we knew for information and the services that we thought we would maybe have to provide in the coming year, that's what Mr. Scanziano felt the budget was.
We looked at it, we looked at tuition, we felt most confident making the suggestion in transportation, but they're all of a kind, right? Every one of them could be trimmed a little bit. If you trim all three of them, now you're sort of tempting fate.
Yeah.
But any one of them could, we felt most confident of those three related lines, that transportation was the one that we felt most confident putting forward.
Okay.
Yeah.
And just to go back for a second, for substitute teachers, again, through March 31st, we were at $314,000 already. So we're going to be over budget in the next report for substitute teachers. So
Yeah.
We were going based off of what our projected expenditures were going to be for this year when we created the budget for next year.
Okay.
And if you're following budget conversations across the state, you will see some districts listing substitute costs as the first sort of non-discretionary cost driver in a lot of these conversations. It's impacting everybody across the state.
I want to go back to textbooks. We are showing, correct me if I'm wrong, it's about $150,000 increase for textbooks. And again, I'm kind of wondering what a small decrease to that looks like. Are we looking at less books per courses, or are we looking at certain courses that we just bump out another year and look to fill next year? It's one of the larger textbook purchases that I've seen in my 5 years.
Yeah.
So I just wonder, as you know, are there certain courses in this list that we still have relevant material that we're teaching these classes with, that 1 year really isn't going to make or break us?
And John, are you asking in addition to the 20,000 that Dr. Freeman already?
I see his 20,000. I just want to get a good understanding of what his 20,000.
Okay.
I'll defer.
Sure, well, so I think you're right. What we would do is we would look at deferring a specific course or courses, depending on the size of the cut. The challenge when you take a chunk from a line like textbooks is you can't really buy 6 new,
Right.
you have to sort of buy class sets.
Yeah.
And particularly because so many of them are digital licenses at this point, and the paper books, they just make you buy to get the digital
Correct.
license.
Yeah.
So we really we would be in a situation where we would be looking at which course had the newest of the books on the list. Off the top of my head, I don't know which one that is,
Okay.
but we've seen 3 science texts come forward. I think that we looked at purchasing as many early college credit courses through that grant as we could, but these are all above and beyond that.
And these are not the new books that we approved, right? These would be replacing existing copy.
A little bit of
The
both.
textbook line would encompass both of those.
I know what you're saying though. So the books that we've recently approved
Right.
were on this past year's budget, not this upcoming budget that has these books accounted for.
Oh, I see. So the ones that we just approved here were new.
Biology,
Were
physics.
budget and some of them were the grant.
Grant.
So paid for already.
So the books that you've seen most recently are paid for, yes.
Yes.
Okay.
But this might mean holding back on something that we thought we'd be able to bring to you next year.
Right. I mean, we
So-
have an American government textbook here that's going to amount to $42,000. I'm not saying that's on the chopping block. I'm just saying, it is the current book that we're using for that course still relevant enough information to use for one more year.
Who's the president? Is it Reagan? What are you doing?
So.
Okay,
And I'm only bringing this up because usually we do not see such a substantial list of textbooks improvements.
Right.
While we all want to shoot for the latest and greatest textbooks for our students, this is an area that we might be able to hold off for a year.
And so the conversation that we're having right now is a little bit about carts and horses,
Yeah.
right? And so to
Yeah.
some degree, we are waiting for this decision to happen tonight, and then Amity will go back to her office with her list and figure out how to absorb whatever reduction you gave. And it might be lopping off one whole course or deferring it for a year, or it might be trying to purchase fewer replacement but we're not completely ready to know exactly what that looks like
Understandable,
until
yeah.
the list is done. So the answer to your question is yes, it could be any or all of those things that you suggested. And once we know if it's 10 or 20 or 60, then that drives how we think when we go back and look at how we respond.
Okay.
all right.
Question about pathways. Do we have any sense of the number of students who have signed up this year as compared to at this time last year? Like,
I
are we
don't think that
trending-
there's a substantial difference. We've seen a pretty good and quick turnaround. I think folks were ready and waiting to sign up when we were able to open that registration, and I think we are full in most courses.
Doesn't make a decision any easier.
It's
All right.
pretty interesting that we're already full in
Yes.
this course.
Yeah, no, that is interesting.
I mean, free programming is a big deal if you're a parent,
It is a
right?
very big deal.
I
Sure.
get that. I
Yeah.
hear where people are coming from.
And just to remind everyone, this is parents that have already enrolled. for
Yes.
this Coming summer.
Yes.
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 That's
Have to be
exactly right.
sensitive to that, yeah.
And I believe that this program also dovetails with like the Jacob's Beach program that's in
With the
app.
Park and Rec
I know
program.
that they're separate programs, but.
But we
a lot of
have
parents
coordinated
utilize
with
both,
them, yes. Yeah.
So.
Yeah,
Can I
and Margaret,
ask
go
a
ahead.
question about the summer pathways program? I think we capped the enrollment, correct?
Yes.
Yes,
Is, okay,
I'm,
and is that just based on the budget capacity and the space capacity? I'm just curious why we cap it at the number we cap it at.
It's actually based on both, right?
Yeah, to some degree space, but primarily our ability to find instructors. And so it was never intended to be a continually expanding program, right? We select a few programs, we offer them, and when they fill, they've filled.
Do you find that you have students who repeatedly come to the program now that we've had it for a few years? Or does the demographics change each summer?
Well, we have new students at each grade level each year, and pathways are open only to students in a specific grade level, so they are grade bands.
But we've seen repeat
We
families.
have seen repeat families. We find that for many of the students, it's really more about sort of hitting that middle school age range when they just stop being interested in that kind of programming as often.
When they
Like,
start
to
saying that.
Arnold's point, these children attend in the morning, and then many of them then go off and attend our public, the park program at the beach, right, the camp there.
Yes, we've got a really nice
It is a
partnership.
day-long program for these families as well, right?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
and the teachers are there just for the mornings, correct?
Yes.
Yes,
Okay,
is the
is it half
answer.
a day?
Can you hear?
Yes,
Okay. Yeah, I think it's a great program, and I hope we can protect it.
Okay. What I'm gonna do then, is I'm gonna, start to guide us, through some decision making if I can. It doesn't mean that new things can't come up, but I would like to at least, start a list here of things that we can start discussing. And I'm gonna go in an order which I am predicting, maybe the things that are easiest, for most of us to agree on and then move down. I could get it wrong and you all let me know. One of the things, that's on this list is, the drama teacher. I think we all, or many of us, certainly expressed support for this on the last round. But I'm thinking that this might be something that we can say, unfortunately, we'd love to do it, but we can't do it this year. It's not a position that exists yet, so we aren't cutting a person or cutting a program. Is there, would
Agreed.
everyone else agree with that
Yes.
assessment? Anyone with problems with that? Okay, so, I'm gonna add it now to the list. So we have 500 for medical and I'm now adding 65,000 for that teacher. We didn't necessarily have a lot of discussion, but Dr. Freeman was noting the ability to defer an expansion of the Transition Academy, not look for a larger space this year, but defer that for another year. It would not change impact the kids and the young people that are part of that program now. It would simply prevent expansion in this year. And that would be allow us to take 50,000 off. It's a terrific program. So I would love to see the ability to expand it, but this might be another area.
Yep.
Do I have anyone concerned about that consideration?
No concern, fully aligned, and I think ultimately this time next year, if we could have a good understanding of what the demand is,
Yep.
so that we could understand this might be, there might be cost to offset this additional 50,000 that we'll presumably be asking for next year.
Okay, so I'm also gonna put that on the list, which brings us to 6,015 of the 835. Again, there wasn't a lot of discussion, but sometimes that means there's not a lot of pushback either.
Right.
There's a 0.5 custodian here. This was a request for an additional custodian for $31,000. Obviously, we want to support our custodial staff, but we're making difficult choices here. Is there anyone who has a concern about reducing this 0.5 position off?
Just want to make it clear, this is not a reduction in headcount.
correct. This would again be
This
an
was an
additional
added, this was a
0.5.
proposed addition.
Yes.
Yep. Just
It's a vacancy.
No, it's
that will-
good. No,
wanna
I'm
make- wanna make it
absolutely,
very
all of that
Good
is.
clarification.
Is there anyone who has concern about that?
No.
Okay, I'm gonna add that. Dr. Freeman noted a $30,000 reduction in the professional services line. And as described, what this would do is not, and Dr. Freeman is gonna correct me if I misspeak, but would not take away anything that is currently happening or is well on its way. It would defer possible projects or possible expenditures
Yep.
for a future time. That would be a $30,000 reduction. Is there anyone who has concerns about that reduction?
No.
Okay, I'm hearing none. So at this point,
176.
176 towards a 335 that we're aiming for. Okay. Those seemed like the safest places to start. Some other things we heard, summer pathways was something we've given a lot of discussion for. I have heard, I think, mostly kind of a consideration of not cutting that program for a host of reasons. Would people agree that that's not something we would add to this list?
Not yet.
Okay,
Yeah, not yet is a good.
not
way to
yet,
put it.
okay,
Yeah.
okay. So then now is an opportunity to look at some other things. I'm gonna note that or just remind us that there are 3 paras here. I'm not comfortable with 3 paras. I think that's taking a pretty big risk. I might consider 2, which would be in the area of $46,000.
I would support that.
You would support that?
Yes.
Likewise.
You would support that?
Mhm.
Moira? Are you
We're
able
talking
to
about
hear me?
2, what is the number?
I'm suggesting
associated with
2 paras, which would be $46,000.
it? I think that's okay, given they're not
They're not allotted yet to
Yes.
any particular,
exactly, thank you.
okay.
That brings to 222.
Yes. Is that right?
Yep.
Thank
You're
you.
currently at 222
222,
as you try to approach 335.
that's right. And so, now, we have a number of other things that have been mentioned out loud, and a list in front of us, from Dr. Freeman. Were you gonna say something?
I think if we start looking towards site improvement textbooks and transportation, while none of us are particularly excited about those, we're beginning to get close.
No, I think that's right. I must say, one of the things that I had been thinking of suggesting, was, a reduction in the site improvement line, and, I do so, and then we'll have to make sure I don't run into my friend and former colleague, John Harland, anytime soon, who, was on the Board of Ed for a while and really promoted the importance of,
That 1% target.
this 1% target.
I agree with you that it could be a line that we reduce, but I think it should be the last line that we use to try to fill in the gap.
I appreciate that logic.
It's not wise. I mean, it's gonna double our costs in 3 years.
For sure.
So it's not savings. It's
Kicking
really
the
kicking the can down the road.
Yeah.
If I could just make a proposal. If you cut both safety monitors and a 7,000 reduction in the athletics, that gets us to the price point that we're looking at. I'm just saying it's in easy math.
Well, so
I'm so sorry. Can I put up, I feel like for some reason my numbers aren't adding up the way that we have. So we have 46 for 2 paras, 65 for a drama teacher, 50,000 off transition academy rent, 31 off for the 0.5 custodian, 30 off for professional services.
Mhm.
Okay,
That's
just-
22.
excellent. I had a math hiccup here. I tried to add something in twice, which was very creative of me, but not.
That would
Okay,
help- that would help us
so-
get to the
That
number.
gets us
That
there.
would.
So we're 113. We're
Yeah, so,
113.
So I have a question. Is there any chance that we could squeeze the medical sponge even more?
I'm so sorry. I do want to make sure that, Ms. Baldwin made a proposal. And I want to follow up on that first.
It's the one thing that doesn't touch the students directly, the
What's-
textbooks, the transportation, and no, but I don't want to see site improvements cut. I think that we really do Cliff a disservice by cutting that again.
So what I just didn't entirely hear your suggestion.
To cut 2 safety monitors instead of 1 for for a total of $76,368.
What's the cost that you have the safety monitor at?
38,134, so I
Okay.
doubled that.
184.
The only thing that I would note, and I don't disagree with the logic of needing to talk about it. I would just suggest, and I know that I heard from some community members that safety and security does directly impact student experience as well. And so I'm not saying we shouldn't be talking about it. And I know that they came in as free this year and they're not going to be free moving forward. I just would note that they could have an impact on student experience.
But to counter that, we've also increased the SROs from 1 to 3. And I know the police department is working very hard at filling those spots. So
That
I
is
think we're gonna have at
yep.
least 2 next year, if not all 3.
We're actually optimistic of having all 3, and so and that's absolutely also correct. And so, yep, I just wanted to note the characterization. I think
Yeah.
some people would take issue with the idea that this doesn't affect student experience, but that doesn't mean it shouldn't be discussed. It should be discussed.
We're spending a lot. The SRO bill just jumped
I-
significantly, and they're trained officers with
Mhm.
arresting powers, with the CIT training, and all the
De-escalation.
de-escalation and
Yes.
all of those things, which the safety monitors do not.
Correct.
And back to my previous conversation about unallocated ARPA funds, right? We very well could be looking at a situation in which weeks from now, we hear ARPA funds are available to be used for safety monitors.
It is a possibility.
We have no idea how many though.
Correct.
Could be 1.
There is a restriction on that though. For if it's used for salaries, it has to be expended by December of this year.
you
So
have
it
to
would not
absorb
be a
that.
full year.
Oh, that's really
That's
important
right.
to
I
understand.
forgot the timing consideration.
That's really
Timing
important to
constraint down
understand.
there.
So that's not particularly
Oh, Moira has a
useful.
hand up.
It's helpful for offsetting the total cost, but
Oh, I see. what
we
you're
couldn't
saying.
say that it would cover the whole cost of
whole
the whole
cost.
year
Okay.
because we wouldn't be able to make that work. But if we had a whole package, we could offset a significant portion of it possibly, as long as we spent those dollars first and our local dollars later.
Moira, you had your hand up?
Yeah, this is jumping a little bit, but we didn't talk about our ECS funding, and I know that the state is staying committed to what was budgeted last year. Is that going to change any, because I know we weren't sure, is that gonna change anything in terms of our tuition line or anything like that? I know it's jumping away from this, but I just was trying to figure out if we had any savings that we hadn't talked to.
No, it's a
That's
really
not
good
the case,
question.
But we're getting down to like smaller numbers now, so I didn't know if there was any.
It's a really good question, and I have always appreciated that here in Guilford, those dollars are counted as revenues at the town level. And so those dollars have never been sort of directly allocated to the board at this level, where if there is a reduction, we are responsible for making up that shortfall. So it's counted as revenue. It's counted as revenue at the town level. And so the quick answer is we expect to be fine this year. We do know that there should be a reduction for us. There has been talk about Guilford experiencing a reduction for 3 years or more, but every year we end up getting a hold harmless decision that gets pushed forward. When that happens, it will be absorbed as lost revenues at the town level, offsetting the overall budget. It won't be something that we would specifically need to make up or fill a gap or cut a service to offset at this level as we make decisions like these we're making tonight.
Right.
And I have always very much appreciated that that's the way that Guilford addresses that. Lots of other communities do it very differently, and the schools end up having to make really unpleasant decisions because of that lost revenue, just at the school level, not absorbing it into a larger overall budget.
So they are our buffer.
Yes, yeah, there are partners in this, and we really appreciate that.
I'm going at this a little differently now. Athletic facilities and expenses. I think I'm hearing resistance to taking anything off that. I just want to check it off my list if that's the case.
I don't see a 30,000 reduction, but I do see a minimal reduction of $7,000, which still gives a significant increase to that line item.
We're talking mostly for that athletic department for the swag.
My
Okay.
caveat would be though, that we can't tell that department how to take that reduction.
That's exactly right.
So, correct, so it's like, we're just taking that money away, and I just wanna make sure that it wouldn't get taken from something else in athletics.
It will not come from ice
Yeah,
or
like-
water.
like-
It won't come from any of the coaching positions that we identified. I would communicate that to Mr. Jarvis, suggesting that we find that in areas that we can and still ensure that the coaches feel supported and appreciated. But I think that we could absorb a $7,000 reduction overall in athletic expenses.
If the reduction comes from athletic supplies as opposed to facilities fees,
Yes.
then it
Yep.
would be directed towards the supply.
So it should be-
And we would make it that specific. Yeah,
As a proposal, it is athletic supplies that is being proposed.
Correct.
for a $7,000
Okay.
reduction.
And again, I want to make it very clear, I can't find the actual page that it's on, so bear with me.
I think it was 82. I'm gonna type it out.
Pretty good if you remember that.
Well, I forgot
Yeah,
it the
page
first time,
82.
which is why I remembered
But
to say.
remember, athletics went up. We were putting more money towards transportation. There was
Yeah.
more money towards supplies. There was money towards ice. There was money towards water. There was money towards coaches. But there was a significant conversation. So I believe that a $7,000 reduction can be.
I mean, honestly, what we are looking at is, I want to frame it a different way. This is a 12% increase to that line item. Instead of a 24% increase.
Yeah, but to be fair, we've kept it in deficit by far more than 12% for the last 10 years.
I don't know,
So
have we? Has that particular
No,
line?
no,
been
but we're
deficit?
making parents pay for it.
No, not
This
this,
line,
not
this
this
is-
line.
That's my concern. My concern is that if we reduce athletics, it's going to wind up falling on the booster club. Like if they still need, like a team still needs what they need in order to practice and play. So I do wonder that if we reduce it, is the burden going to fall back to parents and booster dues are going to increase? That's my concern. And I feel like, again, we heard from people and from students saying it's too expensive as it is. We feel too much like it's pay to play. So I am unsure if I'd be willing to reduce anything under athletic.
All right, let's earmark $7,000.
I'd be willing to just table that.
Yeah.
Well,
Yep.
no, go ahead.
So the athletic department will make sure that whatever the team needs to participate in their sport is provided to them. What the booster clubs normally provide are
Over and
the
above.
additional
That's right.
items over and
That's
above.
Yeah, I feel like we've heard from parents who have said that they had to purchase like football helmets. They had to borrow football helmets from the high school because from the youth department, like youth had to provide 7 helmets last year because we didn't have enough at the high school. Booster clubs are buying balls. So it does seem like we're hearing different stories from the community than we are from the athletic department. So I'm sure all of it is probably true and the truth lies somewhere in between. Like what is really necessary is probably provided. And I'm sure parents and coaches might think they need a little bit more.
I just want to be clear that this particular line item is only for account provide for uniforms and supplies for all teams and apparel for coaches.
So
Doesn't sound,
supplies for athletic
That
teams.
specific line, and I say this with the utmost respect. What Mr. Jarvis identifies as what is absolutely necessary for a successful season might be slightly different than what a coach characterizes as absolutely necessary to the parent group
Yeah.
who does the fundraising. And so I think that I
That's
think
right,
you can understand that difference.
So,
And I can't believe I'm the guy, but when we're looking at a total reduction of 835,000 for 7,000 to fall in athletics, we will work with Mr. Jarvis. I think we'll protect and to wall off the ice and the water, which is what we've really been
Mhm.
focusing on. It wasn't on my list, but I
well,
think that-
30,000. was on
Yes,
your list.
right. I think we could absorb that.
no, this
I was making a point with
This
that,
was a-
but yes, I
this
think
is a
I'm
secondary
good
one.
absorbing the 7,000.
And I'm just gonna name the most obvious thing right now. We are now in the place where none of us wants to be,
For sure.
Yeah.
right? We are cutting things that we felt very confident about on February 5th. We did not choose any of these lines.
Right.
We appreciated the budget that was brought to us, and now we have to find,
And for now, that brings us to 229.
right, so we have, if we keep that 7,000 athletic supplies, we have 106,000 left. This transportation I hate taking anything out of special ed because that line is
Precarious.
precarious. But I think that's still a consideration. I really hate taking money out of textbooks.
So let me raise the
But
question.
if it's a, I'm sorry, let me just finish. So if it's, but again, you know, if we take 10,000, there's a 20,000 here, you know, that might be a place to take. Sorry, you were gonna say.
No, I'm looking for a solution to the penny pinching that we're doing.
Yeah,
Is there any more money we might be able to get out of the medical line?
So I'm going to argue no.
Yeah,
And in fact, our in-house calculations have that number at 490,000.
so
We're working on,
already taking.
we're working on a number that the Board of Finance rounded up to in their deliberations on Tuesday. I'm a little concerned about making the 5,
Okay.
but
Yeah.
don't want to do anything to lower it considering the balance of this conversation.
Okay.
But
Can we
if,
talk,
look, go ahead.
can we talk about the safety monitor again? I think that we definitely need 2 at the high school. I'm concerned about reducing it if it's gonna mean that we're down to 1 at GHS. I know we as a board cannot dictate how they are allocated. But it seems like at the high school, we're doubling the number of students as compared with Adams or Baldwin. I would wonder if we can do anything, like how necessary is a safety monitor at Baldwin?
Well, keep
I
in
know in
mind,
the morning,
we likely have an SRO at the high school most of the time.
right, so if we've got 2 more SROs hopefully coming.
The high school's maintaining.
Can we
their
do
too.
anything
He
with
made
a
a comment
safety
that one
monitor
would-
role
So-
at Baldwin where they help with traffic control? Like, can we have them come in the morning, like at drop off and pick up? And have somebody that's like the flagger, like we had at Baldwin.
Yeah, so my
I
illustration was
mean,
at
at
the
Adams. the lady
At the
that-
current 4 that we're at, the simple thinking would have it at 2 at the high school, 1 at Adams, 1 at Baldwin.
Sure,
And that if we were to reduce that from 2 new positions to only 1, then the simple thinking would be 1 at the high school, 1 at Adams, 1 at Baldwin. But we are not locked into that simple thinking, and I did remind the board that ultimately what we are going to do is see whatever dollars are left and try to come back to you with some kind of creative response. But I said, reducing from 2 to 1 limits that creativity. And I heard a suggestion that we reduce both, which again, everything that was said about the increase of SROs is accurate. And this again is an example of ESSER and ARPA funds that were used. I think they were used thoughtfully and well in a crisis, in response to a crisis that didn't happen here, but happened elsewhere. But now those dollars are gone. And if 1 or both of them went today, there's a logic to the fact that the grant expired and the positions went away and they're not free anymore. And again, I was excited to have these in a budget when the budget wasn't facing an $835,000 reduction. My calculus is different now.
so I'm wondering if, I don't know, like, I don't know if we can reduce the safety monitor by half. If we think there's a possibility that we're gonna get a grant that would maybe cover it through half of the year. And then if we don't get that grant, can this person become a traffic control person for half the amount of money and half the number of hours?
I don't know that we would get someone who wanted that job.
Yeah.
It would be a different role like we do
I-
have at Adams, where we have
Right.
someone who.
And I know I've argued this both ways tonight, but I think we'd have a really hard time filling somebody who we wanted for 90 minutes in the morning and 90 minutes in the afternoon. I'm shocked we have filled it at Adams.
I also want to remind the board that we've made substantial increases in funding for security in general. There's been a lot of things that have been done to all of our buildings to increase security.
Right.
From a
Beyond
technological
personnel,
standpoint and
right,
from an infrastructure
right,
standpoint.
beyond personnel, that is accurate.
I would feel more comfortable reducing the safety monitor if I thought it was happening at Baldwin and not at the high school. I feel like at that age, they still kind of listen.
But you got Mr. Ross there. He's fantastic.
That's my point, right? Like, I feel like you've got kids that are still of an age where they might be inclined to listen to their teacher.
Um. Okay. So there's a possibility of taking 1 safety monitor out. There's a possibility of taking 2 safety monitors out. We can't know what ARPA funds might provide. We've already taken 4 previously, not tonight, out of the total 8 that were proposed in this budget. I'm hesitant to take out 2 more.
Well,
I could live with 1.
but Paul's remark earlier was safety monitors have been a luxury. That is, someone paid for them. And we wouldn't have
Right.
safety, we wouldn't even be discussing this
Right.
right now if it wasn't the fact that we had some free money. So what I'm saying is, we never thought of this as a necessity.
Well, we did have hall monitors, like we did have,
At the high school, and those two aren't being
Those
discussed.
two-
As far as to start cutting into those existing positions, we'd have to take 2 reductions up to 3 or 4, and that would be then cutting into historic and existing positions.
Yeah, no.
But the six
Right.
safety monitors are all new.
Mhm.
So, and the other issue is that every time we cut something here that we really want, and we think we're gonna defer it to next year, we're facing a 3.5% increase to budget just to start with next year.
Without knowing what health insurance is gonna
You know,
be.
and so we don't have much wiggle room in any case, which means there's not gonna be a lot of new additions that we're gonna be able to do next year for the budget. So I'm just trying to make sure that if we're gonna make cuts, some of these cuts are gonna be long-term, not
Yeah.
1 year. That's all.
I could live with one
So-
safety monitor.
Getting rid of, should we
get us
put
to
1 in
260.
there? Let's put 1 for now.
Yeah, 1 gets us to 260.
I'd still say 2, and then we can reduce the reductions that we're gonna take that directly impact kids.
Well, I'm gonna suggest that removing a safety monitor doesn't not directly impact kids. There may be a differential impact.
All
But
right,
I don't think the administration would be coming, asking for them if they didn't have some impact.
So if we took
Okay.
1 at 38,000 for now, does that bring us to 267?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yes,
67.
So we're looking for 68. Does everyone have it?
I'm sorry.
I have us looking for 68.
I don't have us at 268.
Okay, so I'm just gonna, so we're all on the same page.
267.
46,000 for 2 paras.
Yep.
65 for a drama teacher, 50,000 decrease transition academy, 31,000 decrease 0.5 custodian, 30,000 decrease professional services, 7,000 decrease athletic supplies, 38,184, 1 safety monitor, which gets us to 267,184.
Okay, yeah, I hadn't added in the 7,000 yet.
Okay,
At this,
so we're looking for 68 more.
if you took the 20 from textbooks and the 10 from transportation,
Yep,
that now leaves you looking for 38,000 more, which could either come from site improvements or it could come from the second safety monitor.
I
would take it.
had 2 on my line that worth considering, and again, only because of substantial increases, and that was 10%, 10,000 from legal and 10,000 from dues. I just need to better understand how dramatic of an impact that would have. Again, those are 2 lines that had increases of over 46%.
I think the dues would be more challenging as those are actual prices
Right,
and that is an itemized list. Legal would be, again, taking a bit of an assumed liability. We would be making that reduction now, hoping to stay within that line. And again, as we have historically, possibly coming in way over if we ended up having needs that arose. But we've come in over on legal the last 3 or 4 years in a row. And so these are all assumed liabilities and they could all be adjusted with transfers late in the budget season next year.
but I am hesitant to take it over lines that continue to be over the last couple of years, and the trend is clear.
Right, but over the last 3 years, have we increased by nearly 50% every year? Like, I agree with you, over the last 3 years, we have trended over budget,
Right,
but have we made significant increases year over year?
That it might
over year?
begin slowing this year, yes, I understand that.
no, I'm not
um,
understanding, I'm not understanding.
This current year that we're in, we increased it up to the
Yes.
114. Before that, it was under 100,000.
Okay,
And then we did the big jump for the requested budget.
but this,
Which is
all
right.
I'm getting at is this is a significant jump to get up to a much higher number that we've never been at before. And so if, you know, Linda, maybe you could tell me if this current number that we have allocated for the upcoming year for legal, will that cover our current expenses that we have for legal this year?
Yes, when I did this line, I looked at what I projected we were going to spend this year. And probably added a little bit because all the lawyers have been increasing their
Sure,
fee.
yeah,
Sure.
So
respect
added
that.
some factor. So yes, it would cover this year, but last year's legal was 187,000.
That's what I'm
So,
saying.
I mean,
It was
it's-
$187,000
That's fact.
and
It's
And-
not lost on us that our attorneys are very busy with a lot of things.
Yeah. So, I am gonna ask, just to move us along, 20,000 from textbooks, 10,000 for transportation. These are suggestions, secondary suggestions, from Dr. Freeman. I'm ready to accept those as another 30,000, because, I think those are areas if Dr. Freeman is suggesting, again, reluctantly, I'm ready to take his word for those being better places than others. Does anyone have a problem with 20 from textbooks and 10 from transportation based on that reluctant recommendation?
No,
My only caveat is that it's not then reducing a course offering with the textbooks.
Right.
No, it might mean that we put off replacing a text for a year. We would not allow it to eliminate a course offering.
Okay.
Even
thank
the
you.
new courses like the marine biology course.
Yes,
those are already purchased.
yes.
Okay. So, that leaves us still looking for $38,000 per my calculation.
Yep.
Linda, are you?
Oops, sorry.
Go ahead,
I
Moira.
don't think this came up tonight was around the nurse's aid. That was an ARPA funded position we created, and I'm not having an opinion about it. I'm just asking, that was kind of something we brought in during COVID when, nurses are so overwhelmed with, caring for kids and testing and all of that. I just wanted to understand, what's been the play out of that role after, thank God we came out of pandemic.
It's been enormously beneficial, and what that position essentially is doing primarily at the elementary level is traveling to the buildings and bringing all of the required screenings so that the nurse who is full-time in the building does not go offline and become unavailable for parent contacts, for scraped knees, for medication distribution because she's doing scoliosis screening or because she's doing vision screening. So the para traveling and doing that screening then allows the nurse to continue serving the student population. Additionally, she's becoming a frontline substitute for us. So when one of the nurses is out, the para can be the person who can fill that role to a large degree when we're unable to get a substitute nurse in.
Is that allowed, Dr.? I mean, at least they're not a certified, they're not an RN or certified school nurse or.
I'd have to double check with Mr. Bowden, but I know that it's helping to fill a hole when we're simply unable. You're not required to have a nurse at every building, and so I think that it works out fine.
Thank you.
I'm gonna suggest that the remaining 38, I'm gonna go back to the site improvement line and suggest the remaining 38 comes out of the site improvement line. Again, reluctantly.
I would
but
say
that's my
super
suggestion.
reluctantly, but again, we started this meeting by saying we're not happy about any of the decisions that we're making tonight.
Yeah, and I think it's not lost on us too, that if this referendum does not pass, we're coming right back at it. And we're having a lot further, deeper conversations. And so that's where things really do get messy. And not that they already aren't messy.
I think it's really important that anybody who's watching this recognize that this is a really difficult process that we are only engaging in because the referendum failed to pass. Had there been more voters, I honestly think, had every parent of children in the school system voted, that this budget would have passed. It's really important that people who have an opinion on the budget go out and vote that opinion on the budget. And so I appreciate you saying that, because if we're back here again in 4 weeks, making further reductions. This was a really difficult conversation. That's going to be an exceptionally difficult conversation.
Yeah.
If we have to come back
I
and
mean,
go deeper.
it's not lost on any of us that, the one addition to the budget has been athletics. And this is not putting athletics on the chopping block, but it's important to note that we are not touching athletics, right? We're making a concerted effort to say to all those families that came to us, even though the referendum failed, we are keeping the additions that we added into the budget.
And we're not impacting mental health services. We're not reducing school psychologists, school social workers. We're not impacting class size. But man, if we have to come back here again, it's going to be really difficult to make those decisions without impacting some of the core functions of the school system.
Yeah.
All right.
We're there.
We are there if people are comfortable being there. We do have this extra 184. I know this sounds silly. Do you want to take 38,184 for a safety monitor? Do you want to reduce any other line by 184? Should we reduce athletic supplies or site improvement?
I was just rounding the safety monitor to 38,000 if that's acceptable.
That's fine too.
Yes.
Okay. So I'm gonna then repeat and give a last opportunity for comment before we vote. Again, we are required to reduce the budget we have in front of us by $835,000. We have talked about 500,000 from the medical line in response to the fact that our medical consultant has identified that as a reduction to any responsibility we have to that line. $46,000 reduction by taking out 2 paras that were added as proposed additions. Taking out the drama teacher for $65,000, that was an added proposal for Adams. Reducing the transition academy rent proposal by 50,000, which means that instead of looking for a larger place, we will stay put for this year. Reducing the additional proposed 0.5 custodian at 31,000. Reducing the professional services line by 30,000. Reducing by 1 safety monitor at 38,000. Reducing the site improvement lines by 38,000. Reducing the athletic supplies line by 7,000. Reducing textbooks by 20,000 and reducing transportation by 10,000, which someone needs to confirm for me, gets us to $835,000. Mrs. Trudeau is confirming. Is there any further comment or discussion on this proposed list?
I'm just gonna say that I'm very disappointed that we're taking it from site improvements. I just know at the end of the year, we always hear from Mr. Gurnham about the projects that he had to table. He had to Band-Aid together every year. And I just, when it could have easily been taken out from something that is one person who's paid for by us or ARPA funds, I think it should have been the safety monitor.
Other thoughts? This is not a final list until we vote. So if other people have thoughts or agree with that, they should speak up. Moira, go ahead.
Thank you. Well, I like, as everyone has said, none of this is fun or easy. We spend months crafting this budget and hearing from the community and listening to input. And, to John's point, there's never a request for a reduction. It's always to add things. And I just want to, recognize the great work that went into the original budget. And so therefore it makes it extremely difficult to do this process and to pull things out. But I feel like what we've done is measured and thoughtful, and most importantly, keeps the students at the forefront of our decisions and our educators. And I just hope that the community can understand that. And I think that, you never walk away from these discussions thrilled, but I think our priority in protecting our students and our educators throughout this reduction process has been at the forefront. So I just thank my colleagues, because it's never easy.
Any other thoughts or comments? Okay, I'm gonna entertain a motion to make the $835,000 reduction as per the list that I just read out.
So moved.
Second.
Any further conversation? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Is that everybody?
Yes.
Okay. So that is everyone. So then I am going to thank my colleagues, for careful look at all this. I want to thank Dr. Freeman for thoughtful proposals in this reduction. I want to thank Dr. Goss and Mrs. Trudeau each for their important and valuable input in this discussion. I do want to remind voters, this budget will go to the town meeting on May 14th and will go to referendum on May 21st. And we really encourage your engagement in the process.
And Dr. Belstracy, I think it's worth mentioning again that when this budget, as well as the revised town budget, go to town meeting on the 14th, they can both face reduction there again. And we know that from recent experience. And so it's important that people not just be engaged at the referendum, but if they have an opinion on this budget, that they be engaged at both the town meeting and the referendum to be able to express those opinions effectively.
Yes, please, please, please. All right. I am going to now entertain a motion to adjourn. So second,
Second.
all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. Thank you for those of you who joined us. I appreciate your participation or engagement.
One of the